Thank you, Rick Spinrad,
Mhm.
for joining me today, former NOAA administrator and professor at Oregon State University. I know you are aware of reports that have come out in the media about major cuts the Trump administration wants to take with NOAA. While these plans aren't really official, I guess they were leaked to media outlets like New York Times and NPR. Um, as a former NOAA administrator, though, what is your reaction to these plans that could significantly change or gut the industry or the agency that you worked for?
Yeah, well, the first thing I'd say is they actually are official in the sense that these plans that you had seen were what's called the passback, the budget passback, and that comes from the White House. So it's not like this was scribblings on a napkin in a restaurant. This represents the very specific policy perspective of the Trump administration. My reaction, I was deeply and am deeply, deeply concerned for the ability of the agency, NOAA, to be able to continue to do what it does to protect lives, protect property, ensure economic stability. These cuts or these planned cuts will cut the legs out from under the agency's ability to help every American in terms of their lives and their livelihoods and lifestyles. So, my other take was that these cuts are ill-informed at best and misguided, definitely.
It's reported in these media outlets that the Trump administration is recommending cutting cutting the funding of the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research Office. Uh, what does that office do, and why is it important?
So the proposal is actually to eliminate that office. We call it OAR, the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. And that is the office that, first of all, supports all of the agencies, labs, and cooperative institutes. So, for your viewers and listeners in Oregon, for example, there is one such cooperative institute at Oregon State University, and that institute does a lot of research on things like salmon, salmon health, salmon productivity. How do we ensure that the Pacific Northwest continues to have safe and abundant salmon? It's a real challenge now since the numbers have gone down precipitously, especially for Chinook salmon. So there is one immediate impact. The research activities also are helping to improve weather forecasting. And that's something that affects everybody in every part of the country. Basically, with the cuts that are being proposed, the forecast that you get will never get any better and will most likely start getting worse almost immediately. And that's marine forecasts, that's a forecast for severe storms. I used to live in Bend. We counted on those forecasts to understand what the probability of fires and fire weather was. So the ability with the cuts in research to improve our understanding of how fires develop will be dramatically reduced. Water is a big issue all over the country, but in particular in the Northwest. Our understanding of things like atmospheric rivers and how they may change, especially with climate change, that will be diminished. There are so many aspects of what NOAA does for American individuals and communities and industries every day that will basically be ended and no longer available for helping Americans.
Yeah, when you say the forecasts will never get better, what do you mean by that?
Well, the forecasts are always improving as long as we're doing research, and it's not just the smart scientists sitting in a cubicle learning more about the physics of rainfall, for example. It's that research, especially at NOAA, is also responsible for making observations, environmental observations. So one of the main programs that NOAA operates is called the Integrated Ocean Observing System. It's a very bureaucratic sounding program, but it's basically the program that goes out to the ocean, measures things like water temperature, wave height, ocean acidification. Those measurements are then used for a whole bunch of things, including our weather forecast. So if you don't have that information, the weather forecast will not get any better. So we used to say at NOAA that the forecasts, because of the research, the forecasts improve 24 hours every decade. What does that mean? It means the 72-hour forecast that you get right now, that is, what's the weather going to be like in 3 days, is as good as the 48-hour forecast was 10 years ago because of research. And we're continuing on that trend. And I don't think anybody wouldn't want to see improvements in forecasts in terms of the accuracy and the reliability. That's going to stop and take a U-turn, and those forecasts will get no better, will probably get worse because the observations that provide the data for those forecasts won't be there anymore.
Understood. Speaking of the National Weather Service, it's probably more than any other part of NOAA touches the lives of Americans in some point. And we here at Katu, our meteorologists use and depend on data and information from the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service is responsible to declare, issue warnings and watches and that sort of thing. But I've been hearing all kinds of things and reading all kinds of things about what's going on with the National Weather Service, including the firings, the vacancy rates, the canceled balloon launches, and even farming out portions of the Weather Service to the private sector. I mean, what is your assessment of what the Trump administration wants to do with the Weather Service, and how will that negatively impact it?
Yeah, that's a great setup, and I would point out that for the K2 audience, for example, there's a weather forecast office and a river forecast center right in Portland by PDX. There's another one out in Pendleton. So they provide weather, but they're also providing forecasts of what's happening with the rivers. You know, how high is the Willamette? How high is the Columbia? This is a critical issue that the government needs to undertake. This is a responsibility of government. You pay your taxes, and oh, by the way, all of NOAA costs every American about 6 cents per day, and the weather forecasts costs every American about 1 cent per day. So it's not clear to me what kind of cost savings we're really talking about here by selling off the Weather Service. But in specific answer to your question, think about a commercialized weather service. That means your weather forecast now will be like a streaming subscription you get for video. If you can afford it, you get it. If you can afford more, you get premium service. I, for one, don't want to be in a situation where I don't have to pay to get a subscription service to find out whether my kids are going to be safe coming home from school this afternoon, or whether there's going to be a severe thunderstorm. So the other part of this concept that we could commercialize the weather service, which is a complete fallacy, is that there's a tremendous capital expense associated with the weather service. The NOAA operates 16 satellites, 15 ships, 10 airplanes, like the Hurricane Hunters. People know about them. These are expensive to purchase, to operate, maintain. NOAA also operates 122 radars around the country. Those are expensive. The balloon launches that you talked about. I have yet to see somebody from the commercial weather enterprise step up and say, yeah, I'm willing to take up the capital expenses associated with satellites, balloons, radars, ships, airplanes. So for all of these reasons, it's a really bad idea to talk about commercializing the Weather Service. The last point I'd make is that we've been working with the commercial enterprise. So when I talk about commercial weather enterprise, who am I talking about? I'm talking about AccuWeather. Many of your viewers and listeners probably use an app like Windy. I have about half a dozen weather apps on my phone. Those all rely on the Weather Service. And it's taken several decades of negotiation, working back and forth with the commercial weather enterprise to get to the place where we are right now, where they are relatively happy that they're able to have access to the data and the products and services from the Weather Service. And the Weather Service is really happy that there are these commercial enterprises that can add value, that can provide tailored services. It's really a very efficient and effective relationship. And to suggest we could just kind of have a fire sale and sell the Weather Service off to the commercial side just makes no sense at all, and is not a good deal for the American taxpayer.
All right. And another thing I want to talk about today is the fisheries service. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. I see that it's a little slated here for the information I have, 30% cut to the National Marine Fisheries Service. Um, Again, this is a significant thing here in Oregon. What is their responsibilities and why is it important to us here in the Pacific Northwest?
So I'd point out that the numbers are actually higher because there's additional cuts beyond those directly to the National Marine Fisheries Service, or NIMS, as we call it. For example, one of the other cuts that has been proposed is to eliminate the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund, which I think is about 60 or $70 million. And as the name suggests, that is an account, Congress cares deeply about this, that is specifically designed to ensure that we do all of the research as well as manage the hatcheries effectively to restore specifically Pacific Coast salmon. Don't forget, NIMS has responsibility for over 100 commercial species, everything from cod on the East Coast, red snapper in the Gulf, to salmon and pollock in the Pacific and Arctic waters. So the fact that there's this dedicated account that's going to be zeroed out for Pacific Coast salmon recovery should be of real concern to people in your audience. The other thing is that it's not just the program dollars. I think people know that a lot of staff from NOAA have been summarily terminated, in some cases basically coerced into retiring early or resigning. So far, well over 1,000, and at the end of the day, it'll probably be over 2,000 employees at NOAA, including many in the fisheries service. So what, you say? Well, this includes people with very specialized skills. I'm aware of one NOAA fisheries employee who has responsibility for timing the release of salmon from the hatcheries. That person has been terminated, and now there's some question as to whether we will be able to, NOAA, NIMS, will be able to actually carry out its responsibilities associated with releasing hatchery salmon as part of their mission. So those are a few areas. Sea Grant is the other one. Sea Grant is a program in collaboration with universities. So in the case of Oregon Sea Grant, it works closely with the University of Oregon, with Oregon State University. And those are the people like extension agents we have in agriculture. Sea Grant extension agents work on the pier. They're the ones talking to the commercial fishers, the recreational fishers, letting them know about any changes in regulations, letting them know about things like, hey, are there red tides you need to worry about? Harmful algal blooms. So those are just a few of the examples of where the cuts to not just NIMS specifically, but what I would call, say, NIMS adjacent responsibilities will have an impact on what is both a critical economic sector for the Pacific Northwest. And also, I can tell you, as a former Oregonian who used to love to go out and go albacore fishing, it's going to have an impact on the recreational fishing industry as well.
What I've gathered, and you mentioned the cooperative, so what I've gathered from talking to people at Oregon State and at NOAA, and just through observation, that there's a lot of cooperation among scientists from NOAA, from Oregon State University, and from the commercial industry itself. You were at OSU at one time, but it's been a while, so I don't know to what extent your knowledge currently what's happening out there. But I wonder if you can give me a little bit of a background and insight into this cooperation between scientists and industry. And
all you got to do is take a walk down the pier in Newport, where we have our Marine Operations Center Pacific headquartered. I'm sorry, I say we. I'm not with NOAA anymore, but it's still in my heart. NOAA has its Marine Operations Center Pacific in Newport. If you go down there, you will see, depending on how many ships are in, you'll see several of NOAA's fisheries survey vessels there. Those vessels oftentimes will take researchers from Oregon State University through the Cooperative Institute that you alluded to, the Cooperative Institute that's led by Francis Chan at Oregon State University. It includes scientists from University of Washington and other universities. And oftentimes there'll be researchers from other federal agencies, U.S. Geological Survey, Environmental Protection Agency. And it works the other way, too. A lot of times NOAA researchers may go out on the Oregon State University research vessel to understand better what's happening off the coast of Oregon. So if you walk through the buildings in Newport, at the Hatfield Marine Science Center, for example, you would be hard pressed to know, as you walk from one laboratory to another, you'd be hard pressed to know, is this a NOAA employee or an Oregon State employee or a private sector contractor? And because Sea Grant is part of that too, you're always going to have the commercial fishing industry in there to talk about what they're observing. The really interesting collaboration also with the especially the commercial fishing industry is one of the things that we try to do in the ocean sciences is get a better understanding of how to make scientific measurements in the ocean. And it turns out that there's a history of close collaboration, like with the Dungeness crabbers, where, gee, if you could put some specific sensor on the crab pot, the crab trap that's going down for Dungeness, you could get observations of things like oxygen. So for many years, Oregon State, NOAA, and the commercial crabbers had a program to understand hypoxia, basically low oxygen in deep waters just offshore. And they did this by putting oxygen sensors on the crab pots. So there are many examples of that close collaboration. The commercial fishermen know that they will be the beneficiaries of the new understanding that comes out of this research. But I would say the coordination is seamless and robust, and it's manifested in the success that that particular cooperative institute, headquartered in Newport, has had for decades. That CI, I think, has been in operation for at least 20 years.
And I understand these are also kind of potentially on the chopping block as well.
Yep. They are part of, when you look at the plan, all of the CIs, NOAA has, I think it's 18 CIs around the country in places, not just on the coast, places like Norman, Oklahoma, and Madison, Wisconsin. And those CIs involve, I think it's about 80 academic institutions. And they are slated for shutdown. There was a big story just a couple of weeks ago that the Trump administration had begun the shutdown process for the Cooperative Institute that NOAA has with Princeton University in New Jersey. So, yeah, that is very much the case.
All right. So the Marine Operations Center here in Newport, that was big news when it was built. It's my understanding it's a huge economic factor in Newport and Lincoln County, and then broadly speaking, Oregon. There reportedly been firings in there, and there's all kinds of stuff floating around, so to speak, about what's going to happen with that operations center. There's two ships that NOAA moors there permanently, the Shimada and the Rainier. What, in your mind, what kind of loss, how would that impact Oregon if that went away?
Well, there's so many ways to answer that question, Steve. And I think the easiest way is, let's talk about those two ships. So the Shimada is a fisheries survey vessel. If we don't have enough people to make sure that ship can cast its lines and go do its job, and when I say enough people, it's not just the crew on the ship. There's the shoreside support facility. If we don't have enough people, or if we're delayed in sending that ship out, then that ship cannot do its job, which is required by law, incidentally, through the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, to assess how many fish are out there to establish the regulations for the fishing season. So the inability to get that ship out on the water to do its job directly impacts the ability for the commercial salmon industry to do its job. That's one example. Let's take the Rainier. The Rainier is responsible for doing hydrographic survey, mapping and charting. So any boater knows to use a navigational chart. You get them from the National Ocean Service, which is part of NOAA. Those charts have to be updated. Every time there's a winter storm or a strong tide, there's changes to the bottom. And so NOAA, with ships like the Rainier, regularly resurveys and maps and charts all of the coastal waters. Anybody who has traveled over the Yaquina Bay Bar or over the Columbia River Bar knows you want to have an updated chart. It's dangerous. If you get pushed too far one way or the other, you could have very serious consequences, groundings, ships could capsize, you could have very serious problems. So you want those updated charts. If the Rainier can't go out and do her job to map and chart, you're going to affect not just the recreational boaters or the commercial fishermen, but commercial transport, especially coming out of the Columbia River in Astoria, is going to be affected. And usually what that means is that the commercial shippers will be a bit more conservative. It may mean there's less transport of goods and services into and out of Portland, Vancouver. It may mean that goods get more expensive. But those are some of the kinds of consequences that you would see immediately to losses of capability at the Marine Operations Center Pacific in Newport.
Well, you were an administrator. Maybe you ran into things that you thought were inefficient. Noah, did you find that to be the case? And do you think there could be some efficiencies in NOAA and going forward?
Yeah, I think, and actually, my biggest concern was that we were grossly under resourced. If you looked at all of the responsibilities NOAA has by law, and there's probably about 40 laws that say you will do this, you'll put out weather forecasts, you'll monitor space weather, you'll manage the coastal zone, all of these things. NOAA rightfully needs about $12 billion to do that per year, and probably close to 20,000 employees. Just put the accountants and the economists down in a room and tell them figure out how much you need to do all of these things that the law requires. So as of today, NOAA is more like a $7 billion agency with the recent firings, about 11,000 employees. And so, the issue of efficiency is one that kind of ruffles my feathers because I felt like we were a good friend of mine has an expression. She says that you're squeezing the buffalo off the nickel. I'm dating myself with that, but it really trying to get the most out of every possible dollar that we could. And oh, by the way, now for the record, I will tell you that I think the issue of efficiency is a bit of a red herring. It's really effectiveness. I would rather see that we are more effective in terms of weather forecasts, in terms of managing fisheries. The efficiency part will come. Good managers are always going to try to get as much as they can out of the resources. But to come back to your question, of course, I'm sure there are places where you can make improvements in how you do things. I tried when I was administrator, for example, to look at applications of AI, to look at use of cloud computing more effectively, all of which would have made the organization more efficient in terms of bang for the buck. How much are we getting? How much processing are we getting by using cloud computing versus on-premises computing? So I do think there's probably some room for efficiency, but the premise that NOAA already was a fat organization and had too much to work with couldn't be more wrong.
Understood. The Trump administration, is going after different agencies like the Department of Education for political reason. Do you think this drive to basically gut NOAA is political driven? And what do you think that is?
Hey, if it's politically driven, I can't understand that because everything we've been talking about applies just as much to Republicans as it does to Democrats. You think about it, the weather doesn't decide which, in spite of what some politicians think, tornadoes don't decide where to go based on whether the county is red or blue. Hurricane tracks are not defined by geopolitical boundaries. Fisheries do not depend on who's in office in a particular place. And that's why when I was administrator, I thought, outstanding working relationships with some of the most conservative Republicans and some of the most liberal Democrats, because these were issues about their constituencies, about their communities, and about their local economies. I remember one very conservative Republican congressman who told me he wanted to talk to me about climate. And when I said, well, what is it you really want to talk about? He said, I'm a farmer who's in a Midwestern state. And he said, and I can't farm the way my grandfather used to. And I said, yeah, that's a climate issue. And what you're telling me is you want a better seasonal outlook for precipitation. Didn't matter if he was a bright red Republican or a deep blue Democrat. I do not think the motivation for what's happening in NOAA is inherently political. I think what's happening at NOAA is mostly driven by a desire to slash and burn, make cuts, and be able to have a scorecard that says we eliminated 5,000 jobs and $4 billion. Nothing more than that.
What do you think the prospects, because this, as far as I know, has to be approved by Congress. What do you think? I mean, we just kind of touched on it. It's not really a political issue, but people on both sides of the aisle have concerns about this stuff. What do you think the prospects of Congress approving all this stuff the Trump administration wants to do?
I think, talking specifically about NOAA, because that's really the only thing I have expertise
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
I think once Congress is able to focus on the kind of cuts you and I have been talking about, the kind of impacts you and I have been talking about here in this conversation, they're going to say, no, you can't do that. I can't afford to have hundreds of people laid off. I can't afford for this portion of my economy in my state, whether it's fishing or agriculture or anything else, be compromised. I can't afford for the insurance companies that are going to have to pay out losses for hurricanes and tornadoes and wildfires to have any loss in capability. So I think they will. I think they will address these cuts. I would like to say make them whole. I don't know if they will. The reason we're not seeing it right now is, first of all, the president has not submitted the budget, so it's not in Congress, so they have nothing formal to respond to yet. That won't happen until later in the spring. And then I think we'll see some engagement. The other part of this is that if you look at everything that Congress is having to deal with right now, the economy and immigration, everything else, this is not, unfortunately, for people with vested interests like myself, it's not a front burner issue. It will be, but it isn't yet.
Understood. What can you say to people who are concerned about the future of NOAA? What do you say to them? What can they do? Is there any hope?
Yeah, I think your last question starts to get to that. Make sure your member of Congress is aware of your concerns, and that's a right every one of us citizens has. So reach out to your senators and your Congress people, and let them know. And if it's one specific thing you're concerned about, this laboratory, or you're concerned about the Pacific Coast salmon restoration program, let them know that. The other thing is, we all work in different circles, and I think letting if you're a boater, talk to the owner of the marina. Talk to your friends, ask them if they understand what's going on. People like me are going to try to translate what these really esoteric documents coming out of Washington mean in terms of shutting down a lab or closing a program or making your marine weather forecast less useful than it was before. But have the conversation, even if it's just to say, I don't know what NOAA does, but I hear there's going to be some significant impacts. Do you know about that? Ask the questions. But put a lot of pressure, I would say, on members of Congress, because that's where the next critical decisions will be made.